Step into a world of romance and mystery with Tamora Rose. Today we're reading Chapter 30 of Child of the Wind. Epona nickered, letting Canace know the mare knew she was coming just from the sound of her feet on the stable floor. It was heartening to know her horse still missed her, even if her dog had abandoned her. The moment she thought it, she felt guilty. Bentley hadn't exactly abandoned her. He'd been around, mostly in the afternoon and evenings, but by full dark he was usually gone. Canace suspected he'd found a willing bitch nearby, and as long as that bitch was in heat, he'd spend his entire time courting her. He wasn't abandoning his mistress. He was just out courting. Deciding to put her errant dog from her mind, she quickened her pace. Epona kicked up her heels and let out another nicker as she kicked the stall door. Canace laughed and skipped the last few feet, throwing herself against the stall door so she could hug Epona's head. The mare let out a quiet whinny as the pair embraced. They stayed like that for several minutes before Canace pulled away. "We really can't ride," she whispered as she twisted her fingers in Epona's forelock. "Trotting around the paddock isn't any fun for either of us." Besides, if she took Epona from the stables, someone would know she'd been in the stables. Another nicker, this one of agreement, had Canace laughing quietly. Boosting herself up on the gate of Epona's box stall, she rubbed the mare's nose and tried not to think about her forced confinement. The urge to be angry with her husband was strong, but it wasn't really his fault. Until they could find out who was sneaking around the manor, she had to stay close. She wanted to stay close. Well, maybe that wasn't entirely true, but she knew why she had to stay close, which was almost the same thing. "Being a countess is really rather boring," she sighed as she kissed Epona's nose. "I much preferred being a little foundling no one cared about." While the statement held a ring of truth, she couldn't help but feel guilty. She had everything. Wealth, a lovely home, a husband who was kind and generous, when he wasn't spanking her for imagined slights. She wasn't sure she'd forgiven him for that, not yet. Still, he was convenient enough. He kept her warm at night, gave her pleasure, and made her feel safe. And he'd made her miss him. She wanted to follow him around, and that made her angry. She was not some lovesick little fool. She did not love him. She could not love him. So why did she feel the urge to curl up in his lap at all hours of the day and night? Epona's quick whinny interrupted her thoughts. Canace tried to smile as she kissed the mare's nose and hopped down off the gate. She was tired and irritated and sensitive and sentimental, but she was also pregnant, so it was all probably normal enough. Still annoyed, she started to turn, and felt a sharp pain on the side of her head just before the world went black. Jett's booted foot hit the cobblestone drive just as Mac rode through the gates. The large Scot slid off the back of his horse just before the beast had come to a complete stop. Jett extended his hand and almost flinched at Mac's powerful grip. "Good to see you," the Scot said. "Where's Canace?" Instead of taking offense at such gruffness, Jett laughed. "Straight to the point, then. She's probably still watching the horses. Or perhaps Bentley has returned and she's romping with him." Mac frowned. "I thought she'd meet me." "I would have thought so too, but she's not been herself lately." "Is she well?" Mac asked, clearly concerned. "Has she been injured?" Jett blinked and laughed. "No, nothing like that. She's pregnant." The news had Mac slapping him on the shoulder and congratulating his prowess, but the pair sobered as they entered the manor. Mac finally cleared his throat. "Is she happy about the baby?" "Of course. I wasn't sure she would be, but actually being pregnant seems to have settled her. In a way. I have a hard time picturing Canace as settled." It was true. Canace had always been too wild to be described any other way. "Settled for her," Jett clarified. "She's still a little... well, she's still Canace." He called for a servant to bring wine, ordered another to find his wife, before he and Mac settled themselves before a cold fireplace. Mac took the opportunity to study the large room. It was neat, everything was in its place, and the servants were happy and efficient. Given the state of the manor before the wedding, he was certainly impressed. "Canace must be a decent chatelaine after all," he commented as the wine arrived. Now Jett laughed long and loud. He laughed so hard he just about fell out of his chair. After a tense moment, Mac joined in. The pair laughed for several long minutes before they were able to control themselves. "I'm sorry," Jett gasped, still chuckling to himself, "but the very idea is ridiculous. You seem awfully accepting of a fault that concerned you before the wedding. It was unexpected, this development, but not at all unwelcome." The young Earl shrugged. "She's not interested in being a chatelaine. Once I accepted that fact, and once I let the steward and his wife take over those responsibilities, our life became—" "You became more compatible," Max supplied. Then he grinned when Jett looked at him in surprise. "I thought that would happen. She's too beautiful for a man to care about her skills." Jett opened his mouth, remembered Mac was like a father to the woman in question, and snapped it shut again. Extolling the virtues she did have, such as her skills in bed, seemed like a bad idea. Mac knew what he was thinking just from the look on his face. "Wise of you," he said softly. Slightly embarrassed, Jett turned to glance at the door. He had been expecting his wife to bounce into the room, bubbling with excitement, and now would be a convenient time for the distraction. But the door did not open. His wife did not appear. His embarrassment disappeared as concern took over. Rising quickly, he glanced at Mac. She should have been here by now. Something wasn't right, so Jett strode to the door and threw it open just in time to see Dolly hurrying across the foyer. "I can't find her, my lord," the servant gasped, clearly out of breath. Anger flooded him as he assumed she'd gone riding alone. "Did you check the stables?" She wasn't supposed to be in the stables, but she rarely obeyed his orders. It was entirely possible she'd slipped into the stables to saddle her mare. "The grooms assure me Epona is still in her stall." The young woman clutched at her apron in distress. "And she's not in the orchard or in the manor." By now, Mac had joined them. "Is that unusual? She often disappeared at Kincross." Jett barely glanced over his shoulder. She did hear as well, but not for the past few days. She didn't disappear, not on her own. Somehow, he knew this. But Mac didn't, probably because he didn't know about the incidents around the manor. As they moved outside, Dolly at their heels, Jett gave the Scot the shortest version that would make any sense. By the time they reached the stables, Mac was as concerned as Jett. Upon entering the stables, they heard a horse practically shrieking as its hooves struck a wall, or perhaps a stall door. It was a little unclear of the shouting of a groom and the anxious chatter of a dozen other men. Spying the Earl, the groom darted forward. "The Countess's horse, my lord, she's run mad." It was true, Jett discovered. Epona was in her box stall, shrieking as she spun in circles. Her hooves flew out randomly, connecting with the door or the walls with a loud bang. She was going to hurt herself, and Jett didn't know what to do about it. Mac was not so indecisive. He vaulted over the stall door, grabbed the bridle that someone had attempted to force onto the anxious mare, and pulled her head down. He'd trained this particular horse, and he knew she wouldn't spin if she couldn't see, so he used brute strength to force her into a position where she would be still. "A rope," he called. The mare tensed but relaxed once he started whispering in Gaelic. Jett tossed the nearest rope and watched as Mac secured the mare so she would do herself and his stables no more damage. Once the horse was restrained and relatively calm, Mac exited the stall. "Where's Bentley?" the Scot asked, glancing around expectantly. Not really caring, Jett just shook his head and started questioning the grooms. Several of them had certainly seen his wife enter the stables, but not one of them had seen her leave. One groom had seen her at Epona's stall, had assumed she'd tack up her mare and ride in the paddock, and had let her be despite the Earl's orders. No one had seen her after that. Unable to decide between anger at his grooms for their disregard of his orders and worry over his missing wife, Jett paced before Epona's stall as the mare let out a soft whinny. When his wife didn't appear and no fresh ideas were forthcoming, he kicked at the ground in frustration. The angry kick dislodged something small and blue, something that shouldn't have been in the stables at all. Intrigued, he knelt and picked it out of the straw beneath his feet. The moment his fingers touched it, he knew what it was. He had watched Dolly weave the small strands of jewels into his wife's hair just this morning. He couldn't imagine it had simply fallen. When he noticed her hairs tangled in it, he quickly realized it had probably been torn from her head quite forcefully. As that thought sunk in, something cold and dark wrapped itself around his heart. Someone had taken her. He didn't know who and he didn't know why, but he knew he was right. and he knew he had to find her. That's it for today. If you enjoyed this chapter, stay tuned for more tales of romance. Until we meet again, may your days be filled with passion and just a touch of magic.